Did American support of Saddam Hussein, in fact, further U.S. policy aims?
Well, no, it did not. Or at the very least, it produced unintended consequences that actually conflicted with U.S. aims in the region. Indeed, before the shooting stopped, indirect intervention became direct intervention. The result was something called the Tanker War, which did involve American military forces in the fighting and dying. And Saddam Hussein never even sent us a thank you note, although his Air Force did just about sink a U.S. Navy warship.
Tell me about this Tanker War.
Well, from the very outset, the Iran-Iraq War had a maritime dimension. The Persian Gulf is a narrow waterway. Take a look at this map. It's also crowded and immensely important. A considerable portion of the oil fueling the economies of the developed world transits through the Gulf. Note, too, the cheek-to-jowl relationship between Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran at the Gulf's far reaches, with Iraq enjoying only a sliver of direct access. This is the arena in which the Tanker War occurred. Soon after hostilities began, Iraq declared the waters along the Iranian coast a war zone. And shortly thereafter, Iraq began mounting aerial attacks against tankers that took on oil at Iran's Karg Island depot. Modest at first, the frequency of Iraqi attacks began increasing in 1984 as an increasingly desperate Saddam Hussein sought some way to regain the upper hand against Iran. That year, Iraq attacked some 70 tankers. These ships weren't necessarily Iranian-owned. They flew the flags of neutral countries, such as Greece and Liberia. Iraqi aircraft also struck Karg Island itself. In the face of escalating provocations, Iran retaliated, targeting Kuwaiti tankers that were carrying Iraqi oil. In response, Kuwait, rich but militarily weak, invited each of the two global superpowers to bid for the privilege of protecting its tanker fleet. In March 1987, to preempt an increased Soviet naval presence in the Persian Gulf, the Reagan administration agreed to do Kuwait's bidding, and of course, by extension, Saddam Hussein's bidding. Soon, Kuwaiti tankers started flying the Stars and Stripes, and they sported reassuringly American-sounding names, mostly taken from New Jersey towns. So the al-Aish became the Surf City, the Casbah became the Ocean City, and the Al-Raqqa became the Bridgeton, and so on. Let's be clear. Kuwait was not some innocent bystander caught in the crossfire. Kuwait was itself implicated in the ongoing conflict. By loaning Baghdad billions, it was helping sustain the Iraqi war effort in step with U.S. policy. Democracy and human rights were not at stake here. Oil and profits were. Complications soon ensued as the U.S. Navy began escorting Kuwaiti-owned tankers through the Gulf. In May 1987, an Iraqi fighter jet fired two French-manufactured anti-ship missiles at the USS Stark, a guided missile frigate patrolling in the Persian Gulf off the coast of Saudi Arabia. Both missiles found their target, nearly sinking the Stark. 37 American sailors were killed. Saddam Hussein hastily explained that the attack had been a case of mistaken identity. Just one of those things. The Reagan administration graciously accepted Saddam's explanation and his apology. U.S. relations with Iraq were unaffected.
Didn't something similar happen in the 1960s?
Exactly. You may detect interesting parallels between this episode and the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty back in 1967. When larger interests are at stake, the United States government is disinclined to probe too deeply into the question of how American sailors happened to be killed at the hands of a foreign power. At any rate, the Navy wasted little time in fingering the Stark's captain as the fall guy. For failing to defend his ship, he was fired. As was his wont, however, President Reagan incorporated the incident into a grander narrative. The sailors on the Stark, Reagan said, had died as part of a larger American effort, quote, to wage war against war, to stand for freedom until freedom can stand alone, to live for liberty until liberty is the blessing and birthright of every man, woman, and child on this earth, end of quote. A more misleading characterization of the sequence of events leading to the attack on the Stark is scarcely imaginable. But Reagan had a great aptitude for telling Americans what they wanted to hear, and here he put that talent to work.
What happened next?
Well, meanwhile, back in the Gulf, Iran continued its harassing attacks. Rather than directly confronting the far superior U.S. naval forces in the region, it surreptitiously released mines into the Gulf and launched hit-and-run attacks using small patrol boats. When another American frigate, the USS Samuel Roberts, struck a mine and suffered severe damage in May 1988, U.S. forces upped the ante.
What do you mean by that?
Well, days later, U.S. forces launched something that they called Operation Praying Mantis, subsequently described as the biggest U.S. naval engagement since World War II. Praying Mantis began when a U.S. Navy flotilla shelled, occupied, and subsequently destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms located in the Gulf. Iranian naval and air units responded. U.S. forces chased off the Iranian aircraft and either sunk or damaged the Iranian vessels, the largest of which were 2 British-built frigates. The entire action was completed in a matter of hours. President Reagan described the confrontation as a, quote, measured response to Iranian aggression. Our role in this war is neutral, Reagan reassured Americans. This was an untruthful characterization, to put it mildly. Reagan's message to Tehran struck a notably sharper tone. Further, again quoting, further refusal to negotiate an end to the war will be very costly to Iran and its people, he warned.
So that was it?
Well, not exactly. Iranian attacks on Gulf shipping did subside. The Kuwaiti ruling family was certainly pleased. So too, we imagine, was Saddam Hussein. After all, the U.S. had essentially taken the Iranian Navy out of the fight. But one more unholy incident remained before hostilities between the United States and Iran terminated. On July 3rd, 1988, roughly 10 weeks after Praying Mantis, an Iranian commercial airliner took off from Tehran en route to Dubai with a stopover in Bandar Abbas, with 290 souls aboard. As Iran Air Flight 655 began to transit the Gulf, an American warship, the USS Vincennes, then sailing within Iranian territorial waters, misidentified the Airbus A300 as an attacking Iranian fighter bomber. The ship's captain gave the order to fire. A Navy surface-to-air missile knocked the unarmed plane out of the sky. All on board perished. Among the dead were 66 children. President Reagan wasted no time in deflecting any criticism of his Navy. The Vincennes had taken what the president called a proper defensive action. Not only Iranians found that a bit much to swallow, however. In the U.S., a media uproar ensued, followed by various investigations. These achieved little apart from blurring the question of where responsibility should be fixed. In contrast to the captain of the Stark, the captain of the Vincennes retained his command. There was no charging him with a failure to defend his ship, that's for sure. And upon completing his tour of duty, he even received a handsome decoration. The United States government steadfastly refused Iranian demands for an apology or an acknowledgement of responsibility for the killing of civilians. Years later, however, Washington did, however belatedly, agree to pay some $60 million in reparations.
Pretty ugly.
Pretty ugly indeed.
So what's the bottom line?
Later that year, Iran did in fact reach an agreement to end its war with Iraq. How much the U.S. tilt in Iraq's favor mattered in determining the war's outcome is probably difficult to say. In his memoirs, Reagan's Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, offered this judgment regarding the outcome of the tanker war. "We had now clearly won," he wrote. In a sense, of course, this was true. But the "we" in Weinberger's claim needs some parsing. "We" was the Reagan administration working in cahoots with Saddam Hussein. By teaming up with the Iraqi dictator, the United States had indeed succeeded in reducing any putative Iranian threat to the Persian Gulf. Yet, as events would soon reveal, Washington had in effect midwifed the emergence of a new threat, which was Iraq itself. So if the United States had won, as Weinberger claimed, the victory was partial and transitory, almost immediately swept aside by yet another Persian Gulf crisis. After intervening on Iraq's behalf, U.S. forces soon found themselves intervening against Iraq.